Now entering the Bitcoin Podcast Network.
Today's episode is brought to you by KeepKey, the easy, safe, and simple way to protect your Bitcoin, Ether, Litecoin, and many other digital assets. There's no time like the present to protect yourself from hackers, malware, and viruses. Visit KeepKey.com to order your secure hardware wallet today and use the code HUMANIST10 for a limited time 10% discount. And this episode is also sponsored by my patrons on Patreon. We got about 40 at about $700 a month, and so I like to give different examples each episode for why they support. And here's why Patrick says he supports. He says, I've listened to several of your podcasts and read a couple of your Medium posts. I enjoy and respect your work. It's smart, current, accessible, and open-minded, open-hearted content. I like that term, open-hearted, and I hope it's true. You're getting the full me. So today we chat with Eric Meltzer, who's a partner at INBlockchain, China's largest blockchain-focused fund, and he's also the curator of this great newsletter called Proof of Work. And we talk about a couple different things. One is the venture capital perspective on the Asian scene. We talk about Chinese crypto memes. We even talk in a little bit of Chinese, but as you'll see, 可是我不好意思我的中文水平. I am embarrassed by my Chinese level. Yes, 对. So we also talk about a little bit about the newsletter and how it's kind of a common good. It's kind of glue for the commons. And one thing that we're excited by is some kind of security token newsletter that should come out. And then finally, one thing that my most interesting part of this episode, in my opinion, is talking about what it's like to be a crypto venture capitalist. And for him, one of the projects he's most excited by is this thing called Grin, which is this kind of anonymous, which is this like privacy-focused coin, and it's done by these anonymous people on the internet who have these Harry Potter GitHub names, and so he doesn't really know them, and he's not going to invest from like a classic seed round, and he's not even going to invest in like an ICO, which would be pretty new age. The way he's going to quote unquote invest, the way that their company is going to invest is by mining the coin, because it's the only way that they can get that early access. So I find that pretty fascinating as like a venture capitalist who is mining, who is setting up servers and computers to mine a coin from this like anonymous GitHub user's new privacy focused cryptocurrency. So yeah, with that, I hope you enjoy the show. Hello everyone, my name is Reese Sunmark and you're listening to another episode of Creating a Humanist Blockchain Future. And in this podcast, we take a systems thinking approach to doing good in the world. And today we're going to focus on a little bit Series A macro systems, where we as humanity are headed, and then also a little bit of the software systems. What kind of structures are we building in code? And to talk about both of those things, I'm very happy to introduce Eric Meltzer to the show. Is that how you say your last name?
That is it.
Okay, good. We didn't check beforehand. And Eric is a partner at INBlockchain, China's largest blockchain-focused fund, and also the curator of the brilliant Proof of Work, a newsletter that highlights the progress of top projects. So Eric, thanks for being on the show and welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited to chat. And we're chatting from Boston, where Eric is partially based out of, but actually INBlockchain is also one of China's biggest blockchain funds. So could you tell us a little bit more about INBlockchain and kind of why you're based in China?
Yeah. So INBlockchain, we have offices in Beijing, in Hangzhou, in Tokyo, Seoul, and then now in Boston. And you know, we're based in China, I guess, because that's where the founder of the fund started it. We're still there because there's a really interesting community of people building cool blockchain stuff there. And in fact, I would say the infrastructure out in China is arguably better than most of what's out here. I mean, like the Chinese exchanges are way ahead of the game. There's a lot of really good Chinese wallet software. So far, they've lagged behind on, you know, actual like low-level blockchain infrastructure itself. Mm-hmm. So I would say as we invest, you know, we're investing more in America for that kind of stuff. Yeah. But from an infrastructural perspective, it's great. There's a huge community. There's a lot of like crypto traders as well. So it's, you know, from a cultural perspective, it's really ingrained in the culture in China and also in Japan and in Korea to a huge extent.
Yeah. So from a Chinese perspective, I feel like there's this tension where from like a classic Silicon Valley startup perspective, people are like, oh man, like China, oh, Shenzhen's crazy, and like Shanghai's crazy, and like there's so many people working so much harder. But with blockchain, it's like, oh wait, but didn't they ban ICOs? So like, how does the banning of ICOs play out in China? Are you mostly in Hong Kong where people are, or are you're in Beijing and places and people are still working on blockchain work?
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's a lot you can do that doesn't involve an ICO.
No.
Yeah, like we don't really invest too much in ICOs. That's not a huge part of what we do. And I think when that ban did come down, that was motivated, I guess, by a lot of these really scammy ICOs that were out there. Yeah. And I think what's funny is like ICOs get a lot of heat. I think ICOs are fine. Like as a fundraising mechanism, actually, I think they're kind of cool. I guess what I find disappointing is that like the early ICOs, the Ethereum ICO, were fairly egalitarian, and they were an opportunity for kind of anyone that had a little bit of insight into like how cool this was going to become to really make a lot of money. And then as ICOs progressed, they became less and less egalitarian, and now there's 7 pre-sales, and it's just gotten kind of ridiculous. But I would say the lack of that in China really hasn't stopped anyone from working on cool blockchain stuff. We actually, in blockchain, we're like the co-GPs on this new fund called Grand Shores, and that's $1.6 billion, and 30% of that comes from the Hangzhou city government, which is kind of one of the more forward-looking, progressive, regional governments in China. So I think when people think that the Chinese government is like really anti-blockchain or something, that's really not accurate. It's a much more nuanced situation than that.
Yeah, totally. And that's the thing, is by kind of cutting out ICOs, there's so many other ways to both create blockchain things and to invest in the ecosystem. I think the funny thing with what you're saying with ICOs have turned into the 7 pre-sales, or they've also turned into something like basic attention token, where all of the tokens were sold in the first like 36 seconds or whatever. So thinking about from the Chinese perspective, a stat here said that 41% of startups that received funding in China in the first quarter were blockchain related. So that's kind of an example of...
That can't be true.
You don't think that's true?
No, I don't think that's true. I think there are a lot of them, and a lot of the best Chinese VCs are doing a lot of blockchain deals. So but I don't think it's 41%.
Got it. And just for my own edification, when you think like some of the best Chinese VCs, I know some of the more like blockchainy ones, but what are some of like the top names that people should maybe know when they think about the Chinese venture capital ecosystem? Yeah,
I mean, the ones I think that there's like the 3 or 4 that are doing a lot of blockchain stuff. So there's one that's called Suyuan Ventures, and that's run by this guy Bo Feng, and they're really cool. They're one of the few VCs I think that really gets blockchain. So they're not just investing in it because it's hot, but they actually really understand the thesis behind why this is an interesting thing. So there's Suyuan. There's a Gen Fund, which is a fund that was early on seeded by Sequoia. It's run by this guy Bob Xu. They've also done a lot of blockchain deals. They've done a lot of co-investing with us, and they've done a lot of cool stuff. So there's a partner there named Yusen Dai that's looking at blockchain stuff for them. And then there's Danhua. So Danhua has an office in Palo Alto, actually, but they're also a Chinese fund. And they've done a lot of blockchain deals. So they have a partner, like the managing director there, Dovi Wan, is super tied into the blockchain scene, really gets it, and they're doing a lot of that. And then also, Sequoia China. So Sequoia China is like separate from Sequoia US, and they're definitely doing some blockchain stuff.
Interesting. Okay. And how does this feeling in China, how is that different than, because when people talk about Asia, often something like Korea comes up and how a third of, people own cryptocurrency there or whatever.
Right.
What is the vibe difference between Korea and Japan and China?
I don't have a ton of insight into what it's like in Korea because I've only been there super briefly.
Okay.
And I think in Japan, a lot of crypto interest came from the fact that there's a lot of just day traders in Japan. There's a lot of interestingly currency trading is a thing that they actually do there. Like your average American housewife is not a currency trader, but in Japan that's a thing.
Yeah.
And so crypto kind of felt like an easy transition. But I think there's a huge trading population there and very, very few devs. There's a great Japanese blockchain dev community, but it's very small. In China, I think more of the interest came from the tech and VC sector. And so you had tons of these teams, many of whom, what I've seen with this is many of the best teams in blockchain in China are people that have already had really big exits in traditional startups, and then got into this, how to look at it, and then have started kind of diving in. So I think the Chinese scene is maybe a little more tech focused, although there's also a very rich and kind of hilarious blockchain day trader scene there with all their own slang. It's kind of awesome.
Let's stay on that for a second, because on Twitter you post some of these Chinese slangs, and I lived in China for a bit, so let me see if I can say this. 你最喜欢的 crypto slang 是什么？
我喜欢那些不同币的名字，像 Bitcoin 是大饼，然后
Bitcoin 是大饼，大饼，like
big pancake.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So like if Bitcoin is going up in price, people say 大饼飞了, like the big pancake took off or it's flying.
That's funny.
Yeah, no, it's hilarious. And there's all this, there's all this slang.
What are some of your other favorite Chinese? We can move away from Chinese because most of my listeners probably 听不懂 and my 中文 is not very good. So what are some of your other favorite Chinese slangs?
In Chinese there's a funny phrase called 割韭菜. So 韭菜 is leeks, and 割 means like to cut something. And so there's this idea that the market manipulators are constantly just harvesting every new batch of retail investors. And then, like leeks, they grow back.
Nice.
So there's this perception that there's some shady market manipulators out there that are just profiting off the retail masses.
Yes, just chopping new leaks that come into the ecosystem.
Exactly, yeah.
I like that. That's funny. Any others that come to your mind? I personally just love this kind of linguistic strangeness.
Yeah. What other funny ones are there? It's about. Those are the ones. Those are the big
Do they
ones
have memes? Do they have what are
Do
their
they have memes?
Oh, of course they have memes.
Holy shit.
Does China have memes? What a stupid.
The Chinese. Actually, the Chinese meme ecosystem is I would say on a 10x. It's so much faster than in the U.S.
Yeah.
People will every couple weeks there'll be some new phrase.
Okay.
That you just kind of get if you're there and you're speaking Chinese a lot, but yeah, it's really interesting. Much faster than the U.S.
Because in the U.S. we have Biddle is a recent Ethereum based.
Oh, I hate that. That's so lame.
You hate Biddle?
That's so lame, dude. I never look
rebellious,
at that. I don't know if it's Buidle or it's just garbage, man. It's a garbage meme. It's funny. I like Ethereum, and I think there's a great community around it. But I would say from a mimetic perspective, Ethereum is a lot weaker than Bitcoin. The Bitcoin meme ecosystem is incredibly strong, and Bitcoin itself is pretty interesting because I think of it basically as a meme. Bitcoin exists first as a meme and then as a set of instantiated software instructions.
Yes,
which is kind of cool. And that's why you have Bitcoin maximalists. There aren't very many ETH maximalists out there, and I think that has to do with sort of the degree to which it's become a meme and a culture.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that if there is an ETH meme, it's pluralism, it's building and shipping, it's being pragmatic towards the world, trying
that's
to
a hard thing to build a cult around.
Yeah, no, exactly. Except the Vitalik, there's a Vitalik style, do good technical work kind of vibes. But so back to the Chinese memes though, is there a hashtag and then Chinese characters behind it, or is it are they primarily
usually pictures?
Okay, they're picture-based memes. Okay.
Yeah, and then it's funny you can almost tell the provenance of a meme because people just take the same JPEG and work on top of it, and the image quality just gets degraded every time they compress it. So you'll see these just totally blown out images, and you're okay, this is an old meme. This is vintage, 2007 meme.
Hilarious, yeah. I'm reminded of some curation market style things, where then you give money back to the earlier people who propagated the initial meme. That's funny. So is there another part about China that I think people in the U.S. get a lot? It's Neo is Chinese Ethereum or whatever. What does the smart contract ecosystem look like out there? Are people, I guess, is it fair to say, how much do you know about Neo or what's?
Man, I can't talk about any of this. These are all our portfolio companies. I will say that I don't think from a personal perspective, not representing the fund, I don't think that it makes any sense that there would be a Chinese Ethereum. Ethereum is the Chinese Ethereum. Vitalik speaks pretty good Mandarin. He wrote a lot of this code hanging out in an apartment in Shanghai. And the idea that there would be some geographically distinct smart contracting platform for every geography strikes me as kind of ridiculous. That said, Niel has a big foothold in China. They have a really good relationship with the local regulators. And so there probably will be a place for stuff like that. I guess, personally, I don't have a lot of interest in malleable smart contracting systems or really malleable blockchains in general for a lot of reasons. I mean, so like at the point where you build something that regulators can control, it's not really a new thing. Like it's just a less efficient version of, these centralized server-based systems. The other reason, I guess, is that I view the immalleability and immutability of say, the Bitcoin blockchain as a really nice thing if you're trying to build stuff on top of it. So if you don't have to worry that, like, your transactions are going to get reversed, or if you don't have to worry about, then you can build really interesting infrastructure on top of this somewhat unwieldy, extremely rigid structure. Whereas at the point, where like 7 out of 9 validators can decide that your transaction never happened, then you're dealing with a totally different beast, and I think a less interesting one.
So is that, I hear that as like bearishness towards smart contract platforms in general. No,
I don't think so. So I think the smart contracting platforms, it's still like a totally new thing. If you look at it, there's like almost no one that's using smart contracts for anything. Like there's not, like they're really being used just to ICO stuff. And so like we haven't really figured out what they're A, what they're really useful for, and B, like how you should make things for those use cases, which we also do not know yet. But we're getting there, right? I mean, so like there's the massive like Augur mega smart contract that's gone through audit after audit after audit, and like eventually that's going to go live. And so I think we're going to see a lot of really interesting smart contracting stuff. I think there's room potentially for a smart contracting system for, say, financial applications that is not as full featured, that's not Turing complete as like the ETH system is, but that does allow you to do more than Bitcoin lets you do. So one, like a company we invested in, these guys called Cadena out of JP Morgan. Like they're a JP Morgan kind of team that left to do their own thing. And I think what they're doing is cool. Like they have their own, formally verifiable smart contracting language, but it's not Turing complete. And it's on top of a blockchain that is proof of work based, but that has this kind of like federated sidechains model that maybe allows for better throughput.
Interesting.
And I think so we're going to see like a big explosion of these different smart contracting platforms, and then like whichever ones actually get people building cool stuff on them will flourish.
And as you say, you don't necessarily need the Turing completeness of something like Ethereum, and you likely need some variance on state, but you can do whatever you want for financial applications, which seem like the very first frontier here.
I think so, I think it's like the simpler kind of derivative type products or stuff like that. That's going to be sort of the big first application of these things.
And we'll see what it looks like when those other people try to pull developers away from the Ethereum ecosystem, and how I'm very interested to see what that looks like going forward.
Yeah, me too.
So I guess any other final thoughts from you from just an INBlockchain perspective? Anything else, whether it's things you're especially looking at, or things you'd be especially interested in investing in, or anything other parts of INBlockchain that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing that I'm really interested in investing right now is I think that it's time for a return to a transactional medium that has a similar profile from a privacy perspective to cash. And so I guess what I mean by that is like cash isn't necessarily perfectly private, but it's very hard to mass surveil cash transactions. And so I think that's a huge need. I think that's sort of the status quo that we had for millennia until we ended up with this weird centralized digital money like PayPal that allows for just completely panoptic surveillance. And I think we're going back to that. And so like, I want to have a stake in every good privacy-focused coin out there. We were early investors in Zcash, and so we have a pretty big Zcash stake. I really like what Zuko and the team are doing there. We have a pretty decent Monero stake. We're early investors in Moxie's new thing called MobileCoin, which is another privacy-focused project. And then there's this new one on the horizon called Grin. And Grin's being worked on by a pseudonymous team of Harry Potter named badasses out there who I think a lot of them are like Bitcoin people and Monero people. But yeah, it's a really cool project. Also has a privacy focus. So we're gonna probably mine some Grin or get involved with Grin at some level.
You might mine it actually.
Yeah, well, so a lot of these projects
would be a fascinating way to get part of that ecosystem.
I mean, it's not so it's an ASIC resistant algorithm, so you have to mine it on graphics cards. But that's the only way to get it. I mean, there's a lot of these. What I really like actually these new proof of work projects. There's no pre-mine, and so it's a fair launch, and if you want to get some, you just have to mine it.
Yeah.
So I like that.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. It's funny to think, oh, I'm a venture capitalist, and what do? Well, I build up server farms so I can mine new privacy coins, you know, built by pseudonymous,
built by Ignotus Peverell. I mean, so we're not VCs though. Like in blockchain, like I mean, we're very flexible in what we do, and we kind of do everything. So we have like a hedge fund side of things, we have an investment banking side of things. We do like the VC type deals. We used to run one of the biggest exchanges in China. So we're kind of everywhere. And the LPs that we do have in the fund are people who really get blockchain and who are really flexible. And that's been a huge advantage for us. So like we can do whatever we want. I mean, other people are like, oh, our LPA says we can't do token deals, and it's like that sucks. But like we can do truly however, the structure doesn't matter to us. And we're happy to, if we see a cool project and the only way to get it is to go mine it, then we're gonna go mine it. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah, I think you gotta have that poll kind of mindset. Cryptocurrency is vibrant and exciting, but it's not without its share of bad actors. Exchanges and personal accounts can get hacked, computers can be infected with malware. Left unprotected, your digital wealth is up for grabs. Don't let yourself be a victim. KeepKey is the safest and simplest way to protect your Bitcoin, Ether, Litecoin, and other tokenized assets. This hardware wallet is a separate device that you control. Brought to you by the pioneering team at Shapeshift, KeepKey works with the wallet software on your computer to manage your private keys and transactions. Your device is PIN protected, which provides protection if it falls into the wrong hands. Its large display lets you carefully view and approve every transaction. And if your KeepKey is ever lost or stolen, you can safely recover your device without compromising its private keys. The bottom line, you'll sleep easier knowing that your digital wealth is safe and secure. Visit keepkey.com to order yours today and use the code HUMANIST10 for a limited time 10% discount. Okay, so let's try to kind of transition over to Proof of Work now. And Proof of Work is a newsletter that Eric curates. And it has just a bunch of various projects in the ecosystem that essentially Eric sees as good. So let's talk. And it's a great high quality newsletter, especially because when there's lots of various FUD and all things of that variety or scams, like, look, these are just people who are executing on really good projects, and here's what they did last week. So tell me though, how do you think about the curation aspect of it? Who is allowed to get on the newsletter? Will anybody ever get kicked off the newsletter?
Proof of Work, proofofwork.news for anyone that wants to sign up. Was basically just came out of I was having these conversations with people working on a lot of the projects that I like, some of whom are our portfolio companies, but many of whom are not, our investments. They're just things that I like. Yep. And I was having these conversations, pretty much weekly with these people, asking them hey, what did you guys build this week? What's going on? How can I help? And doing that, then I realized other people would probably be interested in this info. Yep. And so I threw it together. And it had a really lame name in the beginning. I think I was calling it Token Update.
Yes, exactly.
Token Update, yeah. And then I had a contest where I was help me name this. And a friend of mine who's actually a pretty well-known author sent me the name Proof of Work. That's funny. And I was like, oh, that's so good.
Mm-hmm. That's perfect.
That's a killer name. Now that I have such a good name, I actually have to go do this thing.
Yes.
And so I picked the projects just basically based on who I think is working on meaningful stuff. I mean, so actually in blockchain, we're pretty against, complicated investment theses. Mm-hmm. And so we don't really have any investment thesis. But one thing we do say is we like to invest in meaningful blockchain applications. Mm-hmm. And so that's what's on Proof of Work is people that are doing something where you couldn't just do it on Bitcoin. You need to have your own chain to do this thing. And B, it's a useful thing that people actually want. Mm-hmm. And so the projects, every week they send in updates on what they're doing, and I kind of collate those updates, and then usually I write a little intro in the beginning. Yep. And that's about it. I don't think I'm gonna necessarily kick anyone off.
Yeah, what would make you kick someone off?
I guess if a project just decided to stop working on something, I definitely would drop them. Yes, or if their updates just got really lame. Yeah. There definitely is. I will say this without naming any names. Mm-hmm. There's definitely some projects that every week blow me away with how good their updates are. I guess Zero X is the one that comes to mind.
Zero X is constantly
Zero X are monsters, dude. They just ship and ship and ship and ship. And
what? Yeah.
I've told people this before, but in the past, the higher this guy Tom, who's like a product manager,
Yep,
and before they hired him, they were like, yeah, we're gonna hire this good PM to like make our shipping pipeline more efficient. And I was like, geez, can you guys like not maybe like let these other guys live, man?
Yeah, make Tom go to one of the
yeah. But no, so 0x is great. Zcash like every week is shipping new code. Every week is working on really important stuff. Saya is a project where like every single week they have a meaningful update.
They say something weird in theirs where they say nebulous repos. They always say like...
so Nebulous is the holding company of Saya.
Okay.
I should probably like, yeah.
I thought that there was just the person being like, some repos were updated, random repos were updated. I don't really know what happened.
No, yeah. That's the holding company for Saya.
Okay.
But yeah, I like the Saya updates. They're all pretty much everyone in there. Like I don't want to like the ones that I haven't named are not bad. They're also all really good. Yeah. But yeah, and then so how I decide whether like a new project goes on is it's pretty tough because there's a lot of really cool projects I do want to add.
Yep.
I think at this point we're getting kind of close to the limit where if I add any more, it's just going to be too long.
Yep.
And so I'm bringing on a full-time team in China. And we're gonna make like a proof of work website.
Yep.
I haven't talked about this yet, so this is like the first announcement.
Ooh,
but, yeah, breaking news.
Exactly.
But yeah, so we're gonna have like a website for it, and the updates will be available there, and you'll be able to sort by stuff like decentralized exchange or privacy coins or whatever. And then we'll keep doing the newsletter, of course, and the newsletter will remain the central thing. But maybe there'll be like some way to kind of collapse or expand sections just so that we can add more stuff without it being like information overload.
Yeah. Yes.
But it's it's always going to be free. It's always going to be non-commercial. We're not going to do ads, just because personally, like this is what I want to read. I don't want to there's a lot of high noise, low signal stuff out there.
So much high noise. It's like, and for me, just to rep it more for a second, I get 3 newsletters. I get This Week in Ethereum, I get Token Economy, and I get Proof of Work. It's like
a lot of people have said that. Like the trifecta of good blockchain newsletters. Exactly. I really like those two also. I read those two also.
Yep.
And I think so. This Week in Ethereum just to me feels a lot like Proof of Work, but like specifically for Ethereum stuff.
Yeah.
Although Evan was first. Like I got my inspiration from him, not the other way around. And then now there's like 0x actually has something called Relayer Update.
Yeah.
The first one hasn't gone out yet, I think.
I think it just went out.
I haven't even got a chance to read it. But yeah, so it's like Proof of Work, but for specifically 0x ecosystem. Yeah. And I'm hoping we'll see more of that.
Yeah, which ones? I was going to ask you that. What other ecosystems? I mean, 0x is known as like the first meta protocol on top of Ethereum. So like, could you see what other like meta protocol newsletters do you see being coming up?
Would be cool. Yeah. I mean, someone's gonna write one for EOS for sure.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people. I mean, just purely because EOS has like billions of dollars of funding out there for dApps. Like people are gonna be building interesting stuff there. I really like Zcash's dev updates. They're really good. And you can get a big picture. Like one thing that I wish I could distill better for Proof of Work that I do a lot of, and I feel like that other VCs are not maybe doing enough, is like just go read the forums. Like I just go read the PRs on GitHub, the issues on GitHub, the forums. I read like Bitcoin Talk still. And I think there's a lot of like valuable information there, and especially like if you want to know how centralized a project is from the decision-making perspective, you can just go read the forums and see like who has a voice and who is allowed to speak, and like how these decisions get made. That was like for us, like I'm pretty bullish on Zcash, and Zcash gets a lot of flack for having like the Zcash Corporation or whatever. But then if you go read the forums, you see like there's like vigorous discussion about what to do. There's like the foundation, and they're sometimes at odds with the corporation, and there's all these random developers, and so like I think it's a pretty robustly community-driven decision process, and you can get that information. That information is out there, and it's really that's something I love about this space is that like because these are open source projects. Most of the information you need to make an investment decision is out there for anyone.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is really cool and very different from VC, traditional VC. So like, there is definitely deal flow still exists, and if you have a good reputation, you're going to be seeing these deals before other people. However, like once these things are on the market, you can make investment decisions based off public information, and that information is just as useful as you make it.
Yes.
But that's pretty cool to me. I really like that.
And you have to have your own good curatorial perspective towards the world, but once you have that, then if you're good at signal to noise, then you can derive the signal.
Yeah.
So I do want to ask though this question of, like I can imagine an EOS specific newsletter or a Zcash specific one, but I'm saying specifically at like the meta protocol level, how 0x.
Oh, you mean like privacy coins? Or something?
No, like something that's built on top of a smart contract platform. Like 0x is built with Ethereum is like underneath it. Yeah. Could you imagine? Like other projects are trying to do things like Dharma, for example, which is one level higher than 0x. Are there other things like that where you're like, ooh, this project seems like it could have a really awesome ecosystem building on top of it, and so awesome that they would have their own, proof of work style?
Yeah. I mean, I think non-fungible tokens and like maybe Decentraland. Decentraland could have its own newsletter. The Decentraland guys are really crushing it, and that's a project where I'll admit I was quite skeptical of it initially.
Yeah, it feels
because I'm like, there's no way these guys can execute on even like half of what they're saying.
Exactly, VR plus what.
Yeah. And then they just keep crushing it. And it's to be frank, like Open Bazaar and Decentraland to me are in the same bucket where it's like. It still kind of sucks, to be frank. Like the product is not there yet. However, they have these teams that are just like unwilling to stop shipping code until the thing is good, and you can see it's just like it's on this road to being a good thing. Like it's just every update it gets better and better and better, and like the teams are totally not losing interest, and that's great. So,
that's cool.
Yeah, I'm happy about that.
Yeah, I think that because they're NFT specific newsletters, but I agree that of the NFT platform, something like Decentraland could be one of the top ones coming up. That's
I guess the other one is like no one's done one for like security tokens yet. Because those aren't really so much of a thing yet. But I think there's going to be this really interesting ecosystem of like tokenized security. And someone could write something about that for sure.
Yes, that makes sense. Cool, interesting. I mean, so thinking about other kinds of commons work, could you see there being, because I see something like proof of work as this awesome piece of like kind of glue for the ecosystem, whereas like you were just doing something for yourself and you're like, oh wow, this would be great to open source this, and in addition to that, something like the proof of work common app. And let's just talk about that for a second. Actually, could you tell us a little bit about the proof of work common app?
Yeah, I've like neglected this over the past 2 weeks, so I'm embarrassed to even mention it.
Awkward.
I have to go to like get back to all the common app people. I'm the worst. But actually, no, my assistant is gonna like take over this and make it really awesome. So we can talk about it. Proof of work common app. Here's what it is. So like all these companies that are on proof of work and open source communities, many of them are hiring. For most of these companies, like hiring is the biggest challenge that they face, just because there's not that many people out there that can do the things that they need. At the same time, there's like this huge interest from newly graduated people, from people that were in these fields, like cryptography, that for a long time were not super hot fields, that have suddenly become extremely hot because of cryptocurrency. And so we made this thing that's just like a Google form, and you can fill it out, and then you fill it out with your name and who you are and a brief resume kind of thing. And then all the companies on proof of work see that application, and if they think you're a good fit, they can contact you. And so it's a way for people to just completely, connect to the ecosystem in a pretty easy way.
Yes.
And it's been cool. We got incredible responses. The first batch of people that responded were like off the charts, qualified. There's some question I put in there like, what's the coolest thing you've ever done or whatever, and like some of the responses to that were just insane. Some guy was like, I rescued a girl who got kidnapped from like the Sahara Desert.
Wow.
I was like, dude, wow.
Indiana Jones.
That's extremely cool. And someone that had launched a satellite. It was really
Blockstream.
Great. Yeah, shout out Blockstream. Shout out Adam back. But yeah, so that was cool, and we're going to keep doing that, and I'm going to automate it a little bit more so that like the projects just get these applicants in a steady stream every few weeks.
Yeah, and I think that this is it's part of this cool stuff where there's so much. Once a lot of the ecosystem has this kind of commons, open source, open access mindset, and as a result of that, you'll have a lot of essentially access for people to become glue within the ecosystem, and something like this proof of work common app is I think it's a great glue within the ecosystem. Do you see there being, I feel like a lot of them come from like venture capitalists, because there's a lot of like money and funding, and also smart people up there that then can, and also who have a high kind of synthesis perspective towards things. What are some other, pretend you could pay some, let's say you had 5 people who were just ready to do ops, every week or whatever, one person ready to do ops every week, for kind of glue for the blockchain and crypto ecosystem. What kind of stuff would you want them to work on? What other like commons, things for the commons, would you want to exist?
I think there's a lot of like just infrastructure that needs to get built. The Lightning Network is a great example where like And I think actually there's a chance, and I probably shouldn't. I mean, so there's like Lightning Network. There's cross-chain atomic swaps for something that can get built on top of that.
Yep.
There's all this like 0x based infrastructure, and I think all this stuff is really awesome. I think there's a decent chance that no one really ends up making much money off of it.
Yep.
Like I think there's a decent chance it just provides a ton of consumer surplus,
Yep.
and that's it.
Yep.
And so so like Dharma and DYDX, for example, like these are two projects I really love.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the team has like a good answer for this. So like I'm not gonna like when I say this, please don't take this as like fact. My sense is that it's going to be very hard to monetize those things, despite them being quite valuable. Just because like they're smart contracts that are out there that anyone can use, that anyone can fork.
Yeah.
And so I think it would be great if we could figure out a good funding mechanism, a sustainable funding mechanism for things like this that are like providing useful value to everyone, but that are difficult to monetize. And like Lightning, for all the attention it gets, there's probably like 15 devs out there working full time on like Lightning implementations, and there should be like 100, right?
Yeah.
And so there's people out there that are doing really good work in this regard. The MIT Digital Currency Initiative, the DCI, run by Neha, is a badass place with a lot of really badass people working on cool stuff, and a lot of Lightning developers employed there.
Yep.
And we're gonna try to support them a little bit this year, and hopefully find more places like that are building stuff that is creating a huge amount of value for people, but maybe isn't able to capture that value.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's been a classic problem within the ecosystem of like, hey, there's this great infrastructure that needs to get built. How do we build it? And it essentially is a pseudo tragedy of the commons problem, but people just need to say, hey, let's fund it.
Right.
And if it gets money, if it brings value back later, that's fine. But primarily, this is just a grant. So I think that's how we've seen a lot of these grant ecosystem things.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. For me, I always want there to also be answers, because I think that's a classic answer is like infrastructure and infrastructure grants. I also kind of want there to be kind of weirder answers, kind of like I think proof of work's common app is a weirder answer, where you say, hey, we need essentially a location where good people, a marketplace for people to And so I don't know if there are any other answers here, but I'm always interested.
Well, certainly there's just like the education pipeline. Like so there's the blockchain education network run by this girl Jing Wang, who's a total badass also, and she's doing a ton of stuff to just bring more smart people into the blockchain ecosystem. And so blockchain education network is like a great example of like a thing we need way more of. And they have some funding. I would say that they're still like underfunded, and so if people are looking for like cool stuff to support, that's definitely a big one. And also like I've seen, so Jing like makes incredibly good use of funds. So like for every $1 that goes into that, there's like a blockchain developer coming out. So that's cool. Jimmy Song at Blockchain Capital runs like a few blockchain sort of programming seminars that also tend to produce extremely competent developers at a really high rate. So we need more of that. And it's cool. So Blockchain Cap is like, I think they're calling it Project Platypus or something, but like they've like got Jimmy like in there funded, ready to do this on a full-time basis, running like community and education. So I think that's super cool. We need more of that.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, is there anything else on the top of your mind before you wrap up?
That's about it.
Cool.
If anyone has a cool blockchain project that they're working on, you can always find me on Twitter. My DMs are open at Wheat Pond.
Wheat Pond, I never got that.
It's like a lot of people have asked me that. It's a transliteration of my name in Chinese.
Oh, okay, so, got it. Exactly. Nice. Yes, you can find them on Wheat Pond at Twitter, and you can also go to INBlockchain
INBlockchain.com.
INBlockchain.com.
Or proof of work, proofofwork.news.
Highly recommended.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Great, so thank you so much, Eric, for being on the show. And by the way, other listeners, if you want to support me, you can go to patreon.com/RhysLindmark. That's patreon.com/RhysLindmark. You can also stake ETH on StakeTree.com/RhysLindmark. Okay, thank you and goodbye.